Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. Late afternoons settled over the quiet outskirts of the Arizona territory, where the land was flat, dry, and open enough for a man to see danger coming from half a mile away. Elias Ward preferred it that way. He had lived alone on this patch of land for nearly 7 years, ever since his younger brother died during a cattle drive gone wrong. The loss had stripped him of nearly everything: family, purpose, and any desire to live close to other people. His routine had become simple: repair what breaks, hunt only what he needs, and avoid trouble. The cabin he lived in wasn't much: weather-beaten wood, an uneven porch, a single window he rarely cleaned, but it was enough for one man trying to keep his life small. That afternoon, Elias was repairing a section of his fence line by the dry creek bed. He held a length of wire in one hand and tightened it with slow, steady pulls. Sweat collected at the edge of his collar. He wiped it with the back of his hand and kept working, focused on the small task that kept his mind quiet. He didn't expect company. He never did. But the sound of footsteps, light, uneven, dragging slightly, made him pause. He turned, expecting maybe a stray traveler or a ranch hand lost on the trail. Instead, he saw a woman approaching from the direction of the distant hills. She walked with exhaustion, shoulders low, her dress covered in dust and travel stains. Her braids were loose, hanging unevenly down her back. Her face carried a tired seriousness, the kind that comes from several nights of worry and no good sleep. Elias felt his guard rise instantly. Strangers didn't come here unless they needed something, and he had learned that people who needed something often brought trouble. The woman stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. She didn't speak at first. She seemed to gather herself, as if deciding whether to keep standing or collapse. "My name is Aayoka," she said quietly. Her voice was strained, but controlled. "I walked for 2 days." Elias didn't respond right away. He studied her dry lips, her trembling hands, the way she stayed standing even though her legs were barely holding her. She was young, but carried the expression of someone who had lived through too much. "What happened to you?" Elias asked, keeping his tone steady and neutral. Aayoka opened her mouth, but the words came out broken. "I have no place. No people now. They push me out." Her breath caught abruptly. Fear flickered in her expression, and she looked down as if bracing herself for judgment. Elias felt a slow tightening in his chest. He was cautious with people, but he wasn't blind to suffering. Then, without warning, Aayoka fell to her knees in the dust. Her voice shook as she said, "No one wants to marry me. I need a husband." The words landed heavily in the dry air. Elias felt the shock hit him fast, sharp and confusing. He didn't know if she meant it literally or if desperation was twisting her reasoning. He stared at her, unsure if she was injured, starving, or simply terrified of what would happen if he sent her away. "Aayoka, stand up," he said quietly, stepping closer but not touching her. "You don't need to kneel." But she didn't move. Her breathing turned unsteady, and panic flashed behind her eyes. She wasn't begging for affection. She was begging for safety, immediate, practical life-or-death safety. Elias understood more than he wanted to. Years of loss had taught him what fear looked like when someone believed they were out of options. He looked at the horizon behind her, empty land stretching for miles. No pursuers, no family, no tribe searching. She truly was alone. "What drove you out?" Elias asked. She raised her head slightly. "They wanted to force me into marriage. I refused. There was a fight. They said I brought shame. I had to leave." Another pause. "If I go back, I will not live long." Elias felt a weight settle inside him. She wasn't lying. Her posture, her tone, the raw exhaustion, everything told the same story. Still, he hesitated. Taking her in meant responsibility. It meant breaking the quiet shield he had built around his life. He knew exactly what it meant to let someone close again, and he wasn't sure he could carry that pain if something went wrong. But leaving her outside was not an option he could live with. He breathed in slowly, made a decision, and offered a hand, not in promise, but in support. "Come on," he said. "I'll give you food and a place to rest. Just for now." We'll figure the rest later. Aayoka looked at his hand for a long second, unsure if she was allowed to take it. Then she reached up, gripping it with surprising strength for someone so exhausted. He helped her to her feet. Her legs trembled. She steadied herself by instinct, not pride. As he guided her toward the cabin, Elias felt a mix of caution and responsibility pressing into him. He didn't know who she truly was or what trouble might follow her, but he knew she needed help, and turning away wasn't something he could do. Not anymore. Inside him, buried beneath years of silence, a thought formed with uncomfortable clarity. If I let her go, she won't make it to sunrise. And that was enough to keep him walking beside her all the way back to his door. Elias pushed open the cabin door, letting Aayoka step inside first. The room was small: one table, one bed, a wood stove, and a narrow shelf stacked with tools and dry food. The air held the smell of burned firewood and old dust. Aayoka scanned the space with quiet attention, as if she expected danger even here. Her shoulders remained tense, but her breathing softened slightly now that she was no longer exposed to the open land. Elias set his hat on a hook and moved toward the stove. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair near the table. She hesitated before doing so, not out of disrespect, but because her legs were still unsure. When she finally sat, she held her hands tightly in her lap, trying not to appear weak. Elias noticed and didn't comment. He poured water from a clay jug into a tin cup and placed it in front of her. She drank quickly, almost too quickly, stopping only when she realized he was watching. Her cheeks tightened with embarrassment. "It's fine," Elias said. His tone remained steady, neither warm nor cold. He was still learning how to speak to someone who looked at him with both fear and hope at the same time. Aayoka lowered the cup and looked around. "You live alone?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Years," he answered, without adding details she didn't ask for. She studied his face as if searching for a reason, maybe trying to understand why a man would choose this silence. Elias saw the question in her eyes, the one most listeners would wonder after Chapter 1. What made this man keep himself apart from the world? He decided not to dodge it. "My brother died. I left town after that. Too many people wanted to talk about it. Too many wanted to pretend they understood." He paused. Distance made things easier. Aayoka nodded slowly. Her expression softened. Not pity, just recognition. She also knew what it meant to leave people behind, even if it wasn't her choice. Elias set a pot on the stove and put in dried beans, jerky pieces, and water. As the fire warmed, Aayoka rubbed her hands together, trying to bring feeling back in her fingers. "You said your people forced a marriage on you," Elias said. He didn't push, but he gave her space to explain what listeners would naturally wonder. Why was she cast out so quickly? What happened exactly? Aayoka kept her eyes on the cup. The man they chose, he was older. Harsh. I did not want him. I refused. My uncle said I was ungrateful. We argued. It became loud. Her voice thinned. They said I shamed the family. They told me to go. She swallowed hard. No one followed. Elias listened without interrupting. Her story carried no dramatics, just the plain truth of someone abandoned because she chose dignity over survival. "You walked 2 days?" he asked. "Yes." "You eat anything?" "No," she shook her head. "I saved what little I had for water. But even that ran out this morning." Elias turned to the pot, stirred it slowly, then looked back at her. "You're safe here tonight," he said, the words simple and certain. Aayoka's eyes flicked upward, meeting his. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She didn't collapse with relief. Instead, she allowed a long, controlled breath to leave her chest, the kind a person releases only when they finally accept they won't die that day. Elias began clearing a space near the fire where she could sleep. "You'll take the bed," he said. She shook her head immediately. "No, I can take the floor." "You'll take the bed," he repeated, firm enough that she knew arguing would be wasted energy. She nodded, still hesitant, still unsure of the rules of this place. He set down an extra blanket. "You said you needed a husband," he continued carefully. "Do you understand what that means here in this territory? People talk. They assume things." Aayoka straightened her back. She didn't flinch this time. I asked for survival. I don't ask you to claim me. Her answer was honest and direct. Elias respected that. We'll sort the rest when you've eaten and rested, he said. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Elias focused on the stew. Aayoka watched the fire, her expression tight but no longer frantic. She wasn't safe yet, not her mind, but she was stable enough to think. Finally, she broke the silence. Why help me? She asked softly. You owe me nothing. Elias didn't answer right away. He sifted through his thoughts, recognizing the same question listeners would ask. Why would a man who avoids all attachments invite a stranger into his home? Because you were alone out there, he said. And I've seen what happens to people left alone on that road. He looked at her directly. I'm not letting that happen on my land. Aayoka absorbed his words with a slow nod. No excitement, no dramatic gratitude, just a quiet acceptance that this man, for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, had chosen not to turn his back. When the stew finished, Elias placed a bowl in front of her. She ate with controlled hunger, careful not to look greedy. Elias sat across from her, eating slower, watching her strength return piece by piece. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills. A chill crept in from the open plains. Elias stood and secured the door with a wooden bar, a habit he followed every night. But tonight, when he did it, Aayoka watched with close attention, reading the gesture as something more than routine. It signaled safety. Elias noticed and turned away, uncomfortable with how much she seemed to depend on that single motion. He pointed to the bed. Rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what you want to do next. Aayoka lay down carefully, as if afraid she might break something in the quiet. Elias stayed near the fire, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes half open. He was tired but alert, the presence of another person in his cabin changing the rhythm of his thoughts. He didn't regret taking her in, but he also knew this decision would pull him into a life he had tried to avoid for years. Still, as he watched her breathe slow and steady under the blanket, one thing became clear. The silence he had lived in for so long was no longer the same. Whether he wanted it or not, his life had shifted the moment she walked onto his land. Morning light pushed gently through the single cabin window, cutting across the floorboards in thin, steady lines. Elias had been awake since before sunrise, sitting at the table with a cup of black coffee, listening to the quiet breathing from the bed. Aayoka had slept deeply, her exhaustion finally forcing her body to rest. Every now and then, she shifted slightly, releasing the tension that had clung to her since she arrived. Elias watched her without staring. He wasn't used to another person sharing his space, let alone sleeping in his bed. But there was no discomfort in it, only a faint awareness that the cabin felt different now, heavier, but not in a bad way. Aayoka woke slowly. Her eyes scanned the room in sharp, quick movements until she remembered where she was. When she sat up, she kept her posture careful, as if preparing for bad news. Elias noticed the instinct and decided to address one of the questions listeners might still be wondering. Does she understand she's not a burden? You slept safe, he said. Nothing happened. Aayoka nodded once. Thank you. Elias motioned toward a small basin near the door. Water to wash your face. There's more outside if you need it. She stood, moving stiffly from the long walk and the hard previous days. At the basin, she washed slowly, as if each splash of water helped her rebuild her sense of self. Elias watched the way she focused on simple actions, cleaning her hands, adjusting her braids, smoothing her dress. It wasn't vanity. It was a calm attempt to feel human again. He served her a plate of cornbread and dried meat. She ate with controlled bites, aware of her manners even in desperation. Elias respected that. Many broken people forgot their dignity. Aayoka clung to hers. Once she finished, Elias pushed his chair back. I'm heading out to check the water barrels. You can come if you want, or stay here and rest. Aayoka hesitated. Then she stood. I will come. Her decision was quiet but firm. She didn't want to sit in the cabin alone, not yet. As they stepped outside, Elias noticed her scanning the surroundings with caution. Hilltops, the creek bed, the trail leading to the ridge. It wasn't fear. It was training. People who grow up in hard land learn to read danger before it arrives. They walked side by side toward the barrels. Elias carried a small toolbox. Aayoka walked lightly, still conserving her strength. After a few minutes, she spoke. You live far from any town. I prefer it that way. Because of your brother. Because of everything that came after, he answered, clarifying what listeners might still wonder. What exactly pushed Elias so far away? He continued, voice steady. People had expectations. They wanted me to move on faster than I could. Wanted me to talk about things I wasn't ready to say. So I left. Living out here, it gave me peace. Aayoka listened without interrupting. She didn't offer comfort, which Elias quietly appreciated. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted to be understood without being pushed. When they reached the water barrels, Aayoka crouched beside one, touching the wooden surface gently. Your land is good, she said. Quiet. Quiet's what I need. Aayoka looked toward the hills. What I need is a place where no one will come looking for me. Elias studied her expression. Calm, but not confident. She wasn't sure yet if she had escaped her past for good. Listeners might wonder, is someone following her? Will danger come later? Elias sensed the same question. Do you expect anyone to show up? He asked. No, she shook her head. Not my people. When they push someone out, they don't chase them. A pause. But others might hear. A woman alone is not safe. Elias understood immediately. Bandits, drifters, anyone looking for trouble. He didn't like that possibility near his land. We'll keep watch, he said simply. Aayoka exhaled slowly, acknowledging the unspoken meaning. She wasn't facing the world alone anymore, at least for now. They spent the next hours in quiet work. Elias repaired a loose barrel ring. Aayoka gathered fallen branches for kindling. She moved with purpose, trying not to appear idle. He allowed it, noticing she wanted to contribute, not just be sheltered. By midday, the sun grew harsh. Elias wiped sweat from his brow and looked at Aayoka's tired posture. We'll stop here, he said. Go inside. It's too hot. Aayoka shook her head. I can help more. You already helped, he replied, his tone calm but decisive. Rest. She didn't argue again. She walked ahead toward the cabin, but when she reached the door, she turned back. You did not ask me what I plan to do next, she said. I figured you needed time. What if I want to stay? Elias didn't answer right away. Her question was serious. She wasn't asking about marriage, not in the way she had yesterday. She was asking if she was allowed to remain here without depending on the desperation that brought her. Staying is your choice, Elias said finally. You don't owe me anything. If you want to leave, you leave. If you want to stay, we'll make room for that. Aayoka lowered her eyes, processing his words with careful thought. No one had given her a choice in months. Having one now made her expression soften in a way Elias hadn't seen before. Then I will stay, she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an emotional confession. It was a quiet decision made by a woman who had survived humiliation, fear, and loneliness. Elias respected that more than anything else she could have said. Inside the cabin, he poured her more water. She accepted it without hesitation this time. As the day settled into late afternoon, Elias felt something shift between them. Nothing romantic, nothing spoken. Just the steady understanding that their lives were now tied by circumstance and choice, not desperation alone. And though neither said it out loud, both of them knew this. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as strangers, but as two damaged people finding stability in the same small, weather-beaten cabin. Late afternoon settled over the land by the time Elias and Aayoka finished the day's work. The sun dropped lower, casting a hard, bright line across the ridge. A light breeze moved through the dry grass, carrying dust toward the cabin porch. Elias stood a few steps ahead of Aayoka, scanning the horizon out of habit. Living alone had taught him that most trouble arrived quietly, long before a man heard it. Aayoka followed his gaze, reading the land the same way he did. She didn't ask what he was looking for. She already understood. A woman alone, cast out so suddenly, probably carried more danger on her back than she realized. Elias decided to address a question that listeners might still have. Is someone tracking her? Could her former tribe return? Or is the danger coming from outsiders? They won't come from me, Aayoka said, sensing his concern. My people believe that once someone is sent away, the land decides their fate. There is no return. Elias nodded. But others could come. Yes, she answered, her voice steady. Men who hear things or see opportunity. It matched the unease that had been creeping into Elias since yesterday. News traveled fast in the territory. A young woman, especially an abandoned one, could draw the wrong kind of attention. He walked back toward the cabin and pulled a rifle from the wall. He didn't raise it or load it, just checked the barrel, the sight, the condition of the wood. Aayoka watched silently, understanding the purpose without him having to speak. Inside, she prepared the small fire, setting the pot for the evening meal. Her movements were calm, but Elias saw the tension in her shoulders. She was learning the patterns of the cabin, but she wasn't settled. Not yet. When the stew began to simmer, Aayoka sat across from him at the table. How far is the nearest town? She asked. Half a day's ride. Do people come through here often? Not unless they're lost or looking for something. She took in that information carefully. Then they could come here because they hear about me. Maybe, Elias admitted, but we'll deal with it if it happens. Ayoka's eyes lowered for a brief moment. Her way of acknowledging fear without letting it show fully. She had lived through being cast out, insulted, and left for dead. The thought of strangers coming for her was not new, but the idea of danger approaching this place, the only shelter she had now, unsettled her. Elias sensed it. No one crosses this land without me knowing, he said firmly. You're safe here. Aayoka didn't argue. She didn't question the promise. She only nodded, trusting him because she had seen how he carried himself. Quiet, steady, never boasting but never backing away. As they ate, Elias noticed she kept glancing toward the window. Not with panic, just awareness. It told him she had learned to read danger long before she heard it. When the sun finally touched the horizon, Elias stepped outside again. Aayoka followed without being asked. The land stretched quiet at first. Then Elias saw something unusual, a thin line of dust along the far trail. It was faint, easy to miss if a man wasn't used to scanning for signs. The dust rose in small bursts, matching the pace of horses moving at a slow, searching walk. Aayoka saw it too. Her breath tightened. How many? She whispered. 3, maybe 4, Elias said. Riders, not moving fast. Aayoka took a step closer to him, not hiding behind him, but aligning herself so she could see clearly. Elias recognized the fear in her eyes, controlled but sharp. She had seen men like that before. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his rifle. He simply studied the movement. The riders were too far to identify, but close enough for him to understand their purpose. They weren't passing through. They were looking around, scanning the land, moving as men who expected to find something or someone. Aayoka spoke quietly. If they are searching for a woman, they will not leave easily. Elias kept his eyes on the riders. They'll come closer before nightfall. If they do, they'll stop here. Aayoka swallowed hard, fear tightening her posture. What will you do? I'll talk to them, Elias said. And if talking doesn't work, I'll make it clear they're not welcome. She looked at him directly. Talking won't work with men like that. Elias didn't disagree. He kept his voice level. Then we'll handle what comes. Inside, Aayoka began moving quietly, preparing the cabin the way someone does when they expect trouble. Closing shutters, pushing the water jug near the wall, checking the fire. Elias watched her work, seeing that she didn't panic. Instead, she organized, measured every step, and made herself ready. As night approached, the riders disappeared behind the ridge. Elias didn't relax. He knew men scouting territory rarely approached in daylight if they planned something later. He barred the door. The sound echoed through the small room. Aayoka paused, listening as if that wooden bar meant more than simple protection. It meant she was not alone in facing what might come. She turned to him. Why do you help me this much? Elias didn't answer immediately. He wasn't a man who enjoyed explaining himself. But she deserved the truth. Because trouble finds people who are alone, he said. And I've seen what happens when no one steps in. Aayoka's eyes softened. Not gratitude. Exactly. but a deep, quiet understanding. Outside, the land went silent, a silence that felt too deliberate. Elias sat near the window with his rifle resting across his knees. Ayoka sat near the fire, hands folded together, watching him with the same quiet vigilance he showed the dark plains. They didn't speak again that night, but both knew the same truth. Whatever was coming was no longer something either of them would face alone. The night settled heavily around the cabin, the kind of darkness that hid movement and made every sound feel sharper than it should. Elias remained seated beside the window with his rifle across his knees. The fire behind him burned low, giving the cabin a warm glow, but not enough to blind his eyes to the outside. Ayoka stayed close to the hearth, her posture straight, her hands clasped to keep them from trembling. She tried to sleep twice, but each time, a faint crack of brush outside pulled her back awake. Elias didn't tell her to rest again. He understood why she couldn't. Hours passed in silence. Then, near midnight, Elias stirred. He leaned forward slightly, head tilted. Ayoka noticed at once. "What is it?" she whispered. "Someone's out there," Elias said quietly. "One man. Maybe two." He didn't hear voices, just the soft scrape of a boot on dry dirt, a sound too careful for an animal. Ayoka moved closer to him, standing just behind his shoulder. Her breathing tightened, but she remained calm enough to think. "Do you think they're the same riders from earlier?" she asked. "Most likely," he answered. "They're checking the place." Ayoka hesitated before speaking again, addressing a question the listeners might still hold. Why doesn't her former tribe come for her? Why are these strangers interested? "If men like that learn a woman is alone," she said softly, "they come to take what they want. They don't ask who she belongs to." Elias didn't look at her, but his jaw tightened with a short, controlled anger she had only glimpsed until now. Outside, the footsteps moved closer, stopping near the porch. Elias stood. He didn't raise the rifle. He didn't want to start a fight, but he held it with the clear intention of using it if needed. A slow knock came at the door. Not polite, not urgent, just the kind of knock meant to test who lived inside. Ayoka froze. Elias didn't. "Who's there?" he called, his voice deep and steady. A man answered, a low drawl coated in fake friendliness. "Evening." Saw a light. Thought maybe someone had water to spare. Elias exchanged a brief look with Ayoka. The man was lying. The nearby creek wasn't dry enough for strangers to go thirsty unless they wanted an excuse to come close. "We're good here," Elias said firmly. "Move on." There was a pause on the other side of the door, the kind that contained quiet calculation. "You got company in there?" the man asked. "Saw a woman heading this way earlier." Ayoka's hand pressed against her chest. Elias didn't glance back at her. "That's none of your business," Elias answered. Another long pause. "Well," the man said, "maybe we'll come by in the morning. Make sure everything's friendly." Elias lifted the rifle slightly. Not to aim, just to be heard. "You won't be welcome then, either." This time, the pause broke with the crunch of boots moving backward. 2 sets, maybe 3. No threats, no shouts, just the sound of men who had gotten the message but hadn't decided if they respected it. After several minutes of quiet, Ayoka exhaled. She stepped away from the door, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "They will return," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "Men like that do not leave alone women. They come back because they think no one will stop them." Elias nodded once. "They'll come back. But not tonight." Ayoka lowered herself onto the chair near the fire, her exhaustion showing openly now. She had been fighting fear and anticipation for too many hours. Elias returned to the window, continuing his watch. After a while, Ayoka spoke again. "You didn't ask me if I brought danger to your home." "I figured you didn't choose it," Elias replied. She looked at him, studying him, really studying him, for the first time. "You don't fear them?" "I fear making the same mistakes I've made before," he said honestly, addressing another unspoken question. "What is his greatest fear now?" "Losing someone because I stood back." Ayoka's expression softened with quiet understanding. She didn't press him for details. She didn't try to comfort him. She just absorbed the truth, the way a person recognizes pain they've felt themselves. The fire crackled. The cabin walls held steady against the wind. Somewhere far beyond the ridge, The riders regrouped, making their plans for the following day. Aayoka stood slowly and approached Elias. Not too close, just enough so he would hear her clearly. "You protected me tonight," she said. "Not because you had to, because you chose to." Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to. She drew a small breath, steady and deliberate. "I won't run," she said. "I won't freeze. Tomorrow, when they come, I will stand beside you." He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes. "You won't stand alone," Elias said. Aayoka held that statement quietly, letting it settle in her mind. Her fear didn't vanish, but something stronger took its place. Resolve, confidence, the sense that she wasn't just a burden, but part of whatever would happen next. The night finally grew still. Elias kept watch until dawn. Aayoka rested lightly, waking often, each time finding him still awake, still guarding the cabin, still here. By morning, they both understood the same truth. What connected them was no longer desperation alone. It was a shared fight, a shared land, and the beginning of something they hadn't expected but now depended on. Dawn broke in a quiet, pale line across the open land. Elias stepped outside as soon as the sky shifted, leaving Aayoka inside to finish waking. The night had been long, full of half-heard noises and careful waiting, but nothing had happened after the late-night knock. That didn't ease his mind. Men who came at midnight rarely gave up by morning. The air was cool, the ground dry beneath his boots. Elias walked up the small rise behind the cabin, the spot where he could see far across the trails and ridges. He scanned the land for movement, not just riders but tracks, dust trails, anything that signaled an approach. Aayoka joined him a few minutes later. She stood at a slight distance, not wanting to disrupt his focus. "Did they come back?" she asked. "Not yet," Elias said, "but they didn't ride far last night. Their horses weren't moving fast enough for a real retreat." Aayoka's face tightened, but she didn't waver. She stepped closer, looking at the land the way someone who has lived through danger learns to look, scanning shadows, slopes, and the bends in the trail. Elias studied her for a brief moment. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't naive. She simply had no place before now where she could stand against something without expecting to die for it. As they walked back to the cabin, Elias decided to give clarity to something the listeners might still wonder. What exactly were those men after? Why this cabin? Why her? "They weren't here for water," Elias said. "They were checking who lives here, checking what they can take." Aayoka nodded. "A woman alone is worth something to men like that, even a woman with nothing." "You're not alone now," Elias said simply. Inside the cabin, she began preparing a small meal, though her hands moved slower than usual. Her eyes drifted to the window often. Elias noticed and addressed another unspoken question. What would happen if these strangers tested her resolve? "You won't have to talk to them," he said. "If they show up, you stay inside." Aayoka shook her head. "If they want to take me, they'll look through windows or force the door. I won't hide." Elias didn't argue. Instead, he took down another rifle from the wall, one older, it would worn by years of use, but still functional. He set on the table in front of her. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. Aayoka touched the weapon with careful fingers. "I've held one. I know the basics." "That's enough." Elias didn't intend to send her into a fight, but giving her the rifle was a sign of trust, something she hadn't received from anyone for a long time. Her expression changed slightly, not a smile, but the first real sign of her feeling grounded beside him. By midday, the heat rose quickly and the land shimmered. Elias went outside again. Aayoka followed without question. Then they saw it, dust rising behind the ridge. Slow, steady, unmistakable. 3 riders, not passing through, coming directly toward the cabin. Elias stopped walking. Aayoka stepped beside him, her hands tightening around the edges of her dress. As the riders drew nearer, Elias could see the details. Their rough coats, the rifles strapped to their saddles, the look of men who traveled with greed rather than purpose. They weren't a gang, just drifters who believed the land owed them something. The lead rider slowed his horse a few yards away. His eyes slid over Elias first, then toward the cabin, where the sight of a second plate on the table or the shape of a woman near the window would confirm what he already suspected. "Mornin'," the man said with a smug tilt of his head. "We thought we'd check on you. Make sure you didn't have trouble in the night." Elias stepped forward. "State your business." The man smirked. "You had a woman come through yesterday. Young one. Apache." His eyes hardened. "That kind don't travel alone unless something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong here," Elias said. "We'll see about that." The second rider spoke up. "We're looking for work. Maybe food. Maybe company." Ayoka's breath hitched. Elias heard it. The lead rider noticed too, and his eyes sharpened, recognizing the fear. Elias lifted his rifle. Not aimed, just held with clear intent. "You're not welcome here. Turn around." The riders exchanged looks. They were weighing their options. 3 against 1 might have looked favorable, but Elias's stance made it clear. If they took one more step, someone would die. The lead rider's smirk faded. "Didn't mean disrespect, friend. We just figure a man alone might need some help." "I'm not alone," Elias said, making it clear they weren't mistaken. Aayoka stepped forward, standing slightly behind Elias's shoulder. She didn't raise the rifle he'd given her. She simply made herself visible. That small action answered another question for the listeners. Would she hide behind Elias, or would she face danger with him? She had her answer. She stood beside him. The riders took in the sight, her steady posture, Elias's silent readiness, the barred cabin door behind them. The lead rider clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth. "All right then. Seems you two have things handled." He tugged the reins and turned his horse slowly. The others followed. They didn't rush. They didn't apologize. They simply rode away, but their glances backward told Elias one thing. This wasn't respect. It was retreat until they found easier prey. When the men disappeared over the ridge, Aayoka let out a breath that shook her. But she didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She stood still, letting her heartbeat settle. Elias lowered his rifle and looked at her. "You held yourself steady." Aayoka met his eyes. "Because you stood with me." He nodded once, acknowledging the truth she spoke. They walked back toward the cabin, neither speaking. The danger wasn't gone completely, but the message was clear. Anyone who came near this land would have to cross a line drawn by Elias Ward, and Aayoka wasn't the helpless traveler they assumed. Inside, they sat near the fire again. This time, their silence wasn't tense. It was steady, shared, a kind of understanding built not from desperation, but from the choice to stand together. And though neither said it out loud, a new question had begun forming in both their minds. If they could face this threat as one, what else could they build together on this quiet, forgotten stretch of land? The riders disappeared behind the ridge, leaving only the fading dust trail and the slow return of silence. Elias didn't lower his guard immediately. He watched the horizon until he was certain they weren't circling back. Aayoka remained beside him, steady but drained, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. When Elias finally stepped backward toward the cabin, she followed, her breath still uneven from the confrontation. Inside, he set the rifle on the table. Aayoka stayed near the doorway for a moment, staring at the wooden bar, then at the window, as if confirming nothing would break through now. She had lived too long, expecting threats to return the moment she relaxed. "Sit," Elias said quietly. Aayoka didn't argue. She sank into the chair by the table, her posture straight but tired. Elias poured water into a cup and placed it in her hands. She drank slowly this time, not like the day she arrived. Her mind wasn't running on panic anymore, just the heavy aftermath of fear. "They'll talk about this cabin," she said. "Men like that tell others what they see." "Maybe," Elias replied, "but they'll also warn the wrong people to stay away." Aayoka looked up, uncertain what he meant. "They rode off because they thought picking a fight wasn't worth it," Elias continued. "Word spreads just as fast about the places that aren't easy targets." It was the truth. A cabin defended by a calm, armed man wasn't the kind of place drifters returned to unless they were desperate. Even then, the risk outweighed the reward. Still, Aayoka shook her head. "I don't want trouble following me." Elias leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Trouble didn't follow you. Trouble shows up in this territory whether a person asks for it or not. He held her gaze. You didn't bring danger here. You faced it with me. Ayoka absorbed that slowly. She wasn't used to being told she wasn't at fault. For a long moment, the cabin remained quiet. The fire crackled, the wind brushed the outer walls, and Ayoka's breathing became steadier. Then she spoke again, addressing something listeners themselves had likely wondered. What exactly did her people accuse her of? Why was she banished so quickly? My uncle said I brought shame, she said quietly. Not only for refusing the marriage, but for speaking too strongly. I told him the man they chose would not respect me. I told him he wanted obedience, not a wife. Elias listened without interruption. My words made the elders angry, she continued. Women are not supposed to challenge decisions made for them. She looked down. Well, I would not take it back. They said I had no place with them. She didn't say it with sadness, only with the clarity of someone who had accepted hard truths. Elias pushed away from the counter and walked to the window. He studied the distant ridge once more. Ayoka watched him carefully, waiting for judgment or pity or some reaction she didn't want. But Elias said none of those things. You were right to leave, he said simply. A place that doesn't respect a person's voice isn't a place worth dying for. The relief in Ayoka's eyes wasn't dramatic. It was small, controlled, and deeply sincere. She didn't want flattery. She wanted validation that her choice hadn't been foolish. Elias sat across from her, hands resting loosely on the table. What do you want now? He asked. Now that you're not running. Ayoka hesitated. This wasn't a question she expected. For days, her entire life had focused on survival. One foot in front of the other, one breath after the next. Now she had to think beyond danger. I want a place where I don't have to fear each day, she said. A place where people do not take something from me because I am alone. Elias nodded. That's a good start. Anything else? She looked around the cabin, at the tools neatly hung on the wall, at the small fire, at the single bed, and at the way this space, quiet and rough, already felt more like a home than anywhere she had known. I want to stay, she said, if you will allow it. Elias didn't answer immediately. He wasn't a man who gave decisions lightly. Ayoka waited, not pressuring him, not pleading, just trusting him enough to be honest. Finally, he spoke. You can stay. Ayoka lowered her head, her shoulders dropping in a way that showed how much weight those 3 words lifted from her. But she kept her voice even. I will work. I will not sit idle. I know, Elias said. You've already been working. The cabin fell into a comfortable silence, something new between them. Not fear, not desperation, something still fragile, but real. As evening approached, Elias stepped outside to gather firewood. Ayoka followed him, not because she was afraid to be alone anymore, but because she wanted to share whatever task he was doing. They carried the wood together. Elias noticed the subtle calm in her movements, the way she no longer snapped her head toward every sound, the way she looked at the land not as a threat, but as a place she might belong. He also noticed something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The quiet presence of another person didn't irritate him. It steadied him. After the chores, they sat near the fire again. Ayoka stitched a tear in her dress with careful fingers. Elias sharpened a knife, the soft scraping sound filling the room. Finally, Ayoka spoke once more, her voice low but sure. Today you stood in front of them. You could have let them take me. Many men would have. Elias didn't lift his head. Many men are cowards. And you? She asked. He met her eyes. I don't run. Ayoka studied him for a long moment, then returned to her stitching. The firelight caught the soft curve of her expression, focused, calm, and more certain than before. For the first time since she had walked onto his land, she wasn't thinking about escape or fear or humiliation. She was thinking about what came next. And somewhere in the quiet between them, the shape of a shared life began forming. Not spoken, not promised, but growing with each task, each danger faced, each word exchanged without fear. The morning after the confrontation felt different. Not tense, not unsettled, but strangely calm. Elias stepped out onto the porch with his coffee, scanning the trail out of habit. Ayoka joined him shortly after, her hair braided neatly, her steps steady. There was a quiet certainty in the way she moved now. The fear that had followed her into the cabin days ago had eased into caution, and that caution had grown into confidence. They worked through the morning side by side. Elias repaired the porch railing, while Aayoka swept dust from the cabin floor and organized the tools scattered near the entrance. She handled each task as if she had always lived there, not as a guest, but as someone who intended to remain. Around midday, Elias noticed her studying the land with an expression he hadn't seen before, curiosity rather than dread. She pointed toward the open patch of soil near the back of the cabin. "You grow anything there?" she asked. "Used to," Elias replied. "Stopped a few years back." "Why?" "Didn't have a reason to keep planting," he said. Aayoka absorbed that answer and walked toward the soil. She crouched down, pressing her palm against the dry earth. "We could plant again," she said. "Small crops. Enough for ourselves. It would give us more than just meat and dry goods." Elias watched her quietly. The suggestion was simple, but the meaning behind it wasn't. She wasn't thinking about surviving a day or a week. She was thinking of the seasons ahead. She was thinking of a life built, not borrowed. He nodded. "We'll plant." Aayoka looked up at him, and for the first time, her expression carried a faint, cautious hope. They spent the afternoon preparing the soil. Aayoka cleared stones and loosened the dirt with a small hand tool. Elias worked beside her, breaking hardened patches the sun had baked over time. The work was slow and quiet, but it brought them closer than any long talk could have. Listeners might wonder, what about the threat from the riders? Would they return? Would the danger linger? Elias had considered it. As they worked, he scanned the ridge often, but the horizon remained empty. The riders had likely ridden toward easier targets. Men who lived off fear sought weakness, and they had found none here. For extra security, Elias checked the rifle rounds stored under the bed, repaired the fence near the far trail, and reinforced the wooden bar on the door. Not because he expected a return, but because he refused to let danger catch them unprepared again. Aayoka noticed his careful preparations. "You think they might come back," she said. "Not soon," Elias replied. "But we stay ready." Aayoka nodded. She respected his vigilance. She also understood that her presence had not weakened this place. It had given Elias a reason to watch the land with more purpose than he had in years. Inside the cabin, Aayoka worked on small changes. She hung a strip of decorated deerskin by the window to block the harsh sun. She cleaned the basin, folded spare blankets, and arranged Elias's tools in order of size. Elias didn't comment, but he noticed. The cabin felt less like a place barely held together and more like a home built by two people instead of one. Later, while Elias cut firewood, Aayoka walked toward the creek. Not far. She didn't want to be out of sight, but far enough to gather water. She moved confidently, not with the skittish fear of someone expecting attack. Her shadow stretched across the dry ground, steady and unhurried. When she returned, she placed the water jug on the table and looked at Elias with quiet conviction. "I want to make this place better," she said. "Not just for me. For you. For both of us." Elias paused mid-step. He wasn't a man used to someone planning around him. He had spent years believing he would die alone on this land, tending the same fences, walking the same trails, living in silence. Now, a woman who had no reason to trust anyone was offering not debt, not gratitude, but partnership. "You've already made it better," Elias said, his voice low and honest. Aayoka lowered her eyes, trying to hide the quiet relief those words brought. But Elias saw it anyway. As evening settled, they sat by the fire for their usual meal. Aayoka ate calmly, her posture relaxed. Elias sharpened a knife, the movement slow and thoughtful. Aayoka broke the silence. "What was your brother like?" Elias looked at her, slightly surprised. She had never asked that before. And listeners, too, would want to understand the bond that had shaped him so deeply. "He was loud," Elias said. "Loved people, loved work. He was the one who talked to everyone. I was the quiet one." Aayoka listened with full attention. "He died because he trusted the wrong men," Elias continued. "I wasn't there. Should have been. After that, being around people felt dangerous. Not for me, for them. So you lived alone to keep others safe?" Aayoka asked, her tone gentle, not accusing. In a way, Elias said, I didn't want to lose someone again. Aayoka considered his words carefully. She understood that fear better than he knew. You didn't lose me, she said softly. And you protected me. Elias met her eyes. You protected yourself too. The fire crackled. Outside, the darkness was deep but quiet. Aayoka leaned slightly closer. Not enough to touch, just enough to show she wasn't afraid anymore. I want to stay through the winter, she said. I want to build something here. Elias didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders eased, and his expression changed in a subtle but sincere way. You stay as long as you want, he said. Aayoka breathed out slowly, letting that promise settle inside her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting for someone to abandon her. She wasn't fighting for a place to belong. She had one. As they cleaned up for the night, Aayoka placed the stitched deerskin pouch she made earlier on the shelf above the stove. Elias noticed. She didn't explain its purpose. She didn't need to. It was a sign, a quiet declaration that she wasn't passing through. She was staying. And Elias, for the first time in years, felt the quiet stability of a future that wasn't empty. The next morning arrived clear and calm, the kind of quiet that felt earned rather than accidental. Elias stepped outside first, as he always did, scanning the ridge and the distant trails. Nothing moved except the wind pushing through dry grass. No dust trails, no shadows, no signs of riders. The danger that once hovered near the cabin had finally faded for good. Aayoka joined him on the porch, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. Her posture was relaxed, not cautious, and the lines of fear that had marked her face days ago were replaced with a steady confidence. She looked over the land the same way Elias did, not as a threat to survive, but as a place she was beginning to claim as her own. What will today bring? She asked. Whatever we decide, Elias said. That simple truth settled over them. Neither was running from anything anymore, and neither was waiting for danger to return. The cabin wasn't a hiding place. It was the beginning of a life made by choice, not desperation. They spent the morning tending the soil behind the cabin. Aayoka knelt in the soft earth she had helped loosen. Elias brought her seeds he hadn't touched in years. Together they planted the first line of crops: corn, beans, squash, small patches, but enough to mark the start of a future. As they worked, Aayoka asked a question listeners might still hold. Would Elias ever go back to town? Would Aayoka be safe legally, not just physically? She wiped her brow and looked at him carefully. If I stay here with you, what will people say in town? Elias didn't stop working. They won't say much if the law has nothing to question. What does that mean? She asked. It means we ride into town today, Elias said calmly. We speak to the preacher. Make things official so no one can claim you don't belong here. Aayoka froze for a moment, shocked. Not frightened, not pressured, but deeply surprised. You would do that? She asked. Elias looked at her with the same steady resolve he showed the night the riders came. I won't have anyone saying you're here without your choosing. And I won't have anyone thinking they can take you away because I didn't stand firm. The weight of those words reached her slowly, settling deep. She had come to him begging for a husband out of survival. Now he was offering a partnership out of respect, stability, and mutual choice. It was something entirely different, something she had never expected. Aayoka nodded. If we do this, I do it because I choose it. That's the only reason it matters, Elias said. They finished planting by midday. After cleaning themselves at the creek, Elias saddled his horse while Aayoka adjusted the simple deerskin pouch she carried. They rode together toward town on a single horse, Aayoka seated behind him with her arms resting lightly at his sides. She wasn't tense. She wasn't watching for danger. She rested calmly, trusting the path ahead. The ride took hours, but the town came into view. Small buildings, a dusty main road, horses tied outside the saloon. People glanced up when Elias rode in. Many knew him as the quiet cowboy who avoided conversation. Seeing a woman with him raised eyebrows, but no one spoke. Elias dismounted first, then helped Aayoka down. She stepped onto the ground without hesitation, her back straight, her chin steady. They entered the small church. The preacher looked up, surprised but welcoming. Elias explained the situation honestly, simple, direct. Aayoka wants a place to belong, Elias said, and I want her here with me. We want this recognized. The preacher blinked, then nodded. If that is your choice, I can do that. He asked them both questions, clear, respectful ones that confirmed their willingness. Elias answered with certainty. Aayoka answered with calm strength. There was no trembling voice, no desperation. This time, she was choosing her future, not begging to be spared from her past. The preacher spoke the words. They exchanged a brief touch of hands, not dramatic, just deliberate and steady. When the simple ceremony ended, Aayoka looked at Elias with quiet clarity. I came here begging for survival, she said. Now I remain because I want to. Elias nodded. That's all I wanted to hear. They left town together, riding back toward the cabin. The land stretched open before them, familiar now, no longer harsh. When they reached the ridge overlooking the property, Elias slowed the horse. Aayoka leaned slightly forward, her voice warm and certain. This is home. Elias took in the view, the small cabin, the new garden, the open land he once thought he would die alone on. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the old weight of grief pressing on him. This is home, he agreed. They unsaddled the horse, lit the fire, and shared a simple meal. No fear, no tension, just the quiet comfort of two people who had finally found safety in each other. Later, as dusk settled over the land, Aayoka stepped outside. Elias joined her, and they watched the last of the sunlight fade. She stood close enough for their shoulders to touch. Neither pulled away. She spoke softly, her tone steady and sure. I thought no one would ever want me. I thought I had no place left. Elias turned slightly toward her. You have one now. Aayoka took a slow breath, letting the words root themselves. And you, she asked, did you think you would always be alone? Yes, Elias answered honestly. Until you walked onto my land. They stayed outside until the stars filled the sky, the cabin warm behind them, the land quiet around them. The wind moved gently through the grass. No riders, no fear, no unanswered questions. Aayoka had found a home. Elias had found a partner. And the lonely cabin on the edge of the Arizona territory now held two lives instead of one. Two people who chose each other, stood for each other, survived together, and built something lasting from the ruins of their pasts. Their story ended not with dramatic declarations, but with the quiet certainty that neither would ever face the world alone again.